Hello, everybody. So, in today's lesson, lesson 10.6, we're going to talk about measuring length. And the essential question we should be able to answer at the end of this is how can you generate or create measurement data and show that data on a line plot? So, those might be that might be a new term to you, a line plot, but hopefully by the end of the lesson, it'll make sense to you. So, in previous grade, in second grade, you learned how to measure length to the nearest inch. But sometimes the length of an object is not a whole unit. For example, a paperclip is more than 1 inch, but less than 2 inches. So we have to have some other way of indicating the length of it. And so in third grade, we're going to learn about measuring things to the nearest half inch or the nearest fourth inch. And so the half inch markings on a ruler divide each inch into 2 equal parts. And so we can see that here on this ruler, this very first line is 0, and this is 1, the first whole unit. So the half inch mark cuts it into exactly equal parts, okay, on the left-hand side and on the right-hand side of the half inch mark. Now this ruler is fairly easy to read because there's only 4 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4. So every line is 1/4. Okay. So we start at 0/4. That would be 0, right? 0/4, 1/4, 2/4, which is the same as 1/2, 3/4, and then 4/4, which is the same as 1. Now, you might have a ruler like this, though. And so we'll have to look at this one and say, okay, well, where would the 4th marks be here? Well, the ruler still helps us, okay? Because we can still find the half inch mark. The half inch mark's still going to divide it into 2 equal parts. So this part right in the middle is 1/2 or 2/4. Okay, so 1/2 or 2/4. Now, if you count from 0, this is the 0 mark, so 0/4, 1/4, 0, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4 marks right here. So this would be 1/4. 2/4. This next longer line is 3/4, and then we get 4/4 or 1. Now, what do we notice about those 1/4 inch lines? They're a little longer, right? So it's 0 and 1. The 1 mark, the 1 hole is the longest line. The half inch mark is the second longest. And then the 4ths are the third longest lines. Okay, so that's one way we can keep track of which ones are 4ths. All right, so keep that in mind. Okay. Now, if we were measuring, let's look at this example here. Use a ruler to measure the glue stick to the nearest half inch. Well, they've lined up the ruler with it for us. We have to put one end of the glue stick at 0. And we're going to look at where the ruler or the glue stick ends on the ruler. So you notice that it's not exactly 2, but it hasn't reached 3. So we have some number between 2 and 3, right? So what do we do in that case? Well, line up the left end like we just said with a 0 mark on the ruler. The right end of the glue stick is between the half inch marks, 4, 2, and 3. Oh, I'm sorry. No. Not 2 and 3. 2 and 2.5. Because this is 2.5 right there. Okay, so the glue stick is in between 2, which is a half inch. Okay, because we go 1, 1.5, 1 2/2, which is 2 wholes. Okay, so 2.5, then 2 2/2, which would be 3. So where is the mark that's closest to the right in the glue stick? What is it closest to? Is it closest to 2.5 or 2? Because we're measuring to the nearest 1/2 inch. Well, aren't we close to 2.5? I only have to go this far to get to 2.5, but I'd have to go back that far to get back to 2. So it's a lot easier to get to 2.5. It's closer. So we're going to say 2.5 inches. So the length of the glue stick to the nearest 1/2 inch is 2.5 inches. All right. Now, what if we were measuring something to the nearest 1/4? Okay, so again, line up the paper clip with the 0 mark on the ruler. The right end of the paper clip is between the 1/4 inch marks for what? So 1 0/4, 1 1/4, 1 2/4, 1 3/4. So it's in between 1 2/4 and 1 3/4. So it's between 1 2/4 and 1 3/4. What is it closest to of those two marks? So remember, 2/4, we could also say 1.5. Okay, so the mark, the end of the ruler, the end of the paper clip is closest to this mark. So 1 3/4. Okay, so 1 3/4. Now, what if we had this different ruler, like I was pointing out earlier? So I put this at 0. Okay, and each of these longer lines is a 1/4. So we'd say this is 1 1/4, 1 2/4, 1 3/4. Okay, so it's closest to 1 3/4 still. Okay. All right, so we'll continue practicing. Now, for this one, you see if you can find 10 crayons. And it would be better for the activity if they're not all exactly the same length. So don't go to the brand new crayon carton and take out 10 crayons. That's not much of a challenge. You don't learn much from that because all you're going to do then is just measure 1 crayon. Okay. And it doesn't really help us for learning about the line plot. Okay. So try to find 10 crayons of varying lengths. All right. And you'll need an inch ruler. All right. So measure the length of 10 crayons to the nearest 1/2 inch. Complete the line plot and draw an X for each length. Okay, so we have crayons that are 0 to 4. Well, if the crayon measures 0, you don't have a crayon. Okay, so the smallest one would be 1/2. But okay, so nearest 1/2 inch. So here's my first one. Okay, and so I'm going to line the ruler up, the end of the crayon with 0. Okay, and then I'm going to see which half it's in between. It's in between 1 and 1.5. 1 and 1.5. It's closer to 1.5. So I'm going to put an X above 1 and 1/2. Okay, so one of my crayons, that's what this X means, is 1 and 1/2. Okay, let's get another one. How about this guy? So those look brand new, right? So we'll line it up with 0, and it goes past 3, but hasn't quite reached 4. So it's between 3, I'm sorry, it's between 3.5 and 4. This is the 1/2 inch mark, right? The longer, second longest line in between the whole numbers. Okay. So is it closer to the 3.5 or is it closer to 4? It's closer to 3.5. So I'm going to put another one at 3.5. Okay, now find another one. Okay, so I got this real tiny one guy here. How much do you think that is? Think that's about an inch? Could be. Let's see. So I put it at 0, right there. And it's slightly past 1. So it's in between 1 and 1.5. But it's closer to 1. Okay, the tip or the end of the crayon is closer to the 1 than it is to 1.5. So I'm going to put that mark at 1. All right, and grab another crayon. All right, here's another one. I'm going to line it up with 0. One end of the crayon with 0. I'm going to look to see where the other side ends. And it's in between 2 and 2.5. And it's almost right on 2.5. So I'm going to say 2.5. All right. How about this one? So line up the crayon with the end of the crayon with 0. Where does it end? This one ends between 2 and 2.5. Again, it seems most closest to 2.5. So I'll put another X above 2.5. So of my crayons, I have 2 that are 2.5. I have 1 that's 1 inch. I have 1 crayon that's 1.5 inches. And so far I've had 1 crayon that's 3.5 inches. Okay, now get another one. Okay, this one looks fairly new. I'm going to assume this is about 3.5. So I line it up with 0. And it's past 3 and is almost exactly sitting on 3.5. So I'm going to put another mark at 3.5. Okay, so that's 2, 4, 6. How about this one? Line it up with 0. Let me bring it up so you can see it better. So that's at 0. The end of the mark crayon is at 0, lined up with the 0 mark on the ruler, and it's touching just before 2.5. Okay, so it's not closer to 2; it's 2.5. A little one here. Line the end of the crayon up with 0, and let's see where it ends. It's past the 1 inch mark, and here's the 1.5 inch mark. So that's closer to the 1 than it is to 1.5. So I'm going to put a mark at an X at 1. Okay, so hopefully you're recognizing what the X's are representing now. The X's on this line plot represent how many of those crayons are that measurement. So far I have no crayons that are 1/2 inch, no crayons that are 2 inches, none that are 3, and none that are 4. Okay, all right, let's try this yellow one. Line it up with 0. And I go out to 2. It's past 2. Hasn't reached 2. It hasn't reached 3. So it's in between. It might be slightly past 2.5. So it's between 2.5 and 3, but it's real close to 2.5. So I'm going to say 2.5 again. Okay, you can tell which ones of my crayons are the most, right? Most of my crayons are 2.5 inches. All right, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. Okay, this is my 10th one. So I'll line that up with 0. And it's in between 3.5 and 4. But it's closer to 3.5. I only have to go back 2 marks on the ruler to get the 3.5. I'd have to go forward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 marks to get to 4. So 3.5. All right. So I've measured all 10 crayons. All right. And the length of the crayons measured to the nearest half inch. Describe any patterns you see. Well, most of my crayons are 2.5 or greater. Okay. So when you're talking about pattern on a line plot, you're just kind of looking at where are most of the X's grouping together or clustering. Okay. So, all right. Now, try this one. How about measuring the length of your fingers to the nearest fourth inch and then complete the line plot? Okay. So we're not doing half inch this time. We're doing fourth inches. Okay. So, I don't know. Start with my thumb, I guess. All right. So, end of my finger there. And it ends right at 2, huh? Okay. So, right here it ends. And it's ending at, I'm going to say it ends at 2. Okay. All right. So, 2. And then next finger. Line it up with 0. See where it ends. Okay, it ends, we're going to say right about here. So it's in between 3 and 3 and 1/4. 3 and 3 and 1/4 is closer to 3. Okay. Finger, let's see, starts at 0 and is going to end. I'll put a little mark right there. So it ends at this mark here. So it's in between 3 and 3 and 1/4. It's real close to 3 and 1/4. Next finger. So line it up with 0. I'm going to say it ends right there. So it's in between. That's 2.5 or 2 2/4, and this would be 2 3/4. Which one is it closest to? 2 3/4. So 2 3/4. And the last one. All right. And we're going to say it ends right there. So it's this first mark here. So it's between 2 1/4 and 2 2/4. Now, it's exactly the same distance between them. Okay, so typically on that situation, you would round up. Okay, so it's exactly between 2 1/4 and 2 2/4. So I'm going to round up to 2 2/4. All right, so now that's on one hand. I'm going to assume my fingers are the same length on both hands. Okay, so I'm going to double the X's on each one. Okay. All right. So that was to the nearest fourth inch. Now, measure the length of the key to the nearest half inch. Is the key closest to 1.5, 2 inches, or 2.5 inches? Okay. Line up the end of the key at 0 on the ruler and see where it ends. It ends in between 1.5, 1.5, and 2. Well, it's closest to 2, right? Look at the length of the distance we have to go to get to the next ½ inch. Okay, so 2 inches. All right, number 2. Measure the length to the nearest 1/4 of an inch. So you're going to line the pencil up with the 0 on the ruler, and then you're going to see where it ends. Okay, it ends right there, right? So it's in between 4 and 5. So it's 4 and 1/4, 4 and 2/4, 4 and 3/4. So what is it closest to? Well, it's almost sitting right on 4 and 3/4. So I'm going to say 4 and 3/4 inches. Okay. All right, so now move on to the next one. These are measuring the lines. Okay, and we're going to measure each of these lines 2 different ways. Okay, so we're going to have 2. Let me zoom out, please. Okay, so we're going to measure these lines twice. One time, we're going to measure them to the nearest ½ inch, and we're going to create a line plot for that. Then we're going to measure them to the nearest 1/4 inch and put a line plot together for that. So let's measure to the nearest ½ inch first. All right, so let's line up the marks with 0, and it's like right in the middle of 1/2, right? So I'm going to put 1/2 on the left. So I'm going to put the ½ inches on the left-hand side, and then when I measure to the 1/4 inches, I'm going to put those on the right-hand side. All right, so the first one's ½ inch. The next one, here's the ½ inch mark, and here's 1. It only has to go 3 marks to get to 1, and I'd have to go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get to ½. So I'm going to call this 1. Okay, this next line, it's right at 1. Okay, next line, that's sitting right at 1.5, right? It's exactly in between the 1 and the 2. 1.5. Next one, here's 1, and here's the next, there's the ½ is closer to 1.5. So we're getting a lot of 1s and 1.5. Okay, this next one, 1.5. That makes sense. It looks almost exactly like the top one. All right, this next one. That's a really long one, right? It's 2.5. Okay. It was exactly between, halfway between the 2 and the 3. 2.5. Our next line, it's sitting right at 2, right? Okay. And our last line, right at 0. Okay, here's 1. So it's not between 1 and 1.5. It's between 1.5 and 2. You only have to go 2 marks to get to 2. We're going to call that 2. So now, how do we fill out the line plot for this? All right. Well, first thing we need to do is come up with a title. All right. So what's the title of ours? So length of lines to nearest ½ inch. Okay, and now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 measurements. So how many different numbers do I have? I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 5 different numbers. So what if we said this first one was 0, and then 1/2, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. Okay, that would include all of my possibilities, right? None of my lines were longer than 3. None of them were 0. So it's going to be in between these, right? So how many were 1/2 inch? 1, 1. So only one line was 1/2 inch. How many lines measured 1 inch? 2. These 2. So we're going to put 2 X's to represent those 2 lines. 1.5. Well, all the ones in the middle were 1.5, so 3. Okay, then we had how many at 2? We had 2. And our longest line was 2.5. So let's confirm to make sure we have the right number of X's. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines, right? So I should have 9 X's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so that was to the nearest 1/2 inch. Most of the lines, it's actually balanced, right? The most were 1.5 inches. The second most were 1 and 2 inches. And then the least amount of lines were 1/2 inch or 2.5 inches. All right, so number 4 now. Okay, so now we're going to measure the same lines, but to the nearest 1/4 inch. Okay, so it's still, we're going to line it up with 0. Okay, I'm going to zoom in for now while we measure. All right, so 0, 1/4, 2/4. So is it closer to 1/4 or 2/4? It's closer to 2/4. Okay, the one that measured 1 inch. Okay, so it's not quite to 1 yet. So it's between this mark and this mark. So it's between 3/4 and 4/4. Remember that's 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. And it's closest to 3/4. Okay, and the next line's a little longer. It might be 1 inch, I mean. Yeah, it is. It's 1 inch, or we could say 4/4 or 1. Okay. All right, the ones that's 1.5 inches. We'll line it up with 0, and it's exactly at 1.5. So since we're doing fourths, we could say 1 and 2/4. Next line, it's not quite to the half. So it's between 1 and 1/4 and 1 and 2/4. It's close to 1 and 2/4. And the last one, it's sitting right exactly at 1.5. So 1 and 2/4. All right. And the last one, last 3, I mean. So this was our longest one, and it was nearly right on 2.5. So it would be 2 and 2/4. This mark was sitting right at 2. So I'm just going to call that 2. And the last one, it's not quite to 2. So it's in between 1 and 3/4 and 1 and 4/4. And it's exactly halfway in between. So I'm going to round that up to 2. All right. So now, what is our label for our line plot this time? Well, it's still length of lines. To nearest 1/4 inch. Okay, so nearest 1/4 inch. And we're still going to start with 0, but now each line will be 1/4. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, or 1, 1 and 1/4, 1 and 2/4, 1 and 3/4, 1 and 4/4, or 2, 2 and 1/4, 2 and 2/4, 2 and 3/4, 2 and 4/4, which is also the same as 3. All right, so which of our lines, let's see, we have one line that's 2/4, we have one line that's 3/4, we have one line that's 4/4 or 1 whole, we have 1, 2, 3 that are 1 and 2/4, we have 2 that are at 2, and we had 1 that was 2 and 2/4. So 3, 6, 9, I still have 9. Okay, so length of lines to the nearest 1/4 inch. Okay, all right, let's move on. Let's try number 5. Okay, so now this time they're giving you a line plot and they want you to answer based on using the line plot. All right, so for numbers 5 through 7, Tara has a magnet collection from places she visited. She measures the length of the magnets to the nearest ½ inch and records the data in a line plot. Are more magnets longer than 2.5 inches or shorter than 2.5 inches? All right, so that's basically comparing, right? More than 2.5, shorter than 2.5. So 2.5 is neither more than or less than 2.5. It's 2.5. So how many are less? Well, the ones I circle are less than 2.5. So I'm going to say less than 2.5 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 magnets are less than 2.5. How many are more than 2.5? So circle them. Okay. So again, why aren't we using the ones right in the middle? Because 2.5 isn't greater than 2.5 or less, shorter than 2.5. 2.5 is 2.5. All right, so how many are more than 2.5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so are more magnets longer than 2.5 inches or shorter? All right, so more magnets are longer than 2.5 inches. Explain. There are 6 magnets shorter than 2.5, but 7 magnets longer than 2.5. 7 is greater than 6. All right, number 6. How many magnets measure a whole number of inches? How many magnets have a length between two whole numbers? All right, so Again, we can keep track of this. We can say whole numbers and length between whole numbers. All right, so how many are whole numbers? Well, anything that is a counting number is a whole number. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 are whole numbers. The rest have to be somewhere between, right? So how many X's are there? 1, 2. Well, we just count those. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. So were there 15 magnets? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Yep. 10 magnets measure a whole number. 5 magnets All right, 7. Well, back to 6. 10 magnets. 10 magnets measured a whole number, and 5 magnets measured between two whole numbers. Now, 7. Explain why you think the line plot starts at 1 and stops at 4. Well, what's the smallest magnet? 1 inch. What's the largest or longest magnet? 4 inches. So this is how I see it. I see it as the shortest magnet is 1 inch. The longest magnet is 4 inches. So if I have the smallest at 1 and the longest at 4, all the other magnets have to fit in between 1 and 4. All right, number 8. What is the length of the pencil to the nearest half inch? This should be easy, right? Put it at 0. Find out where it ends. It ends between 3 and 3.5. Is it closer to 3 or is it closer to 3.5? Closer to 3.5. Explain how you measure the pencil. So basically, you just have to tell people on this question, how do we measure things? Line up one end of the pencil with a 0 mark on the ruler. It ended between 3 and 3.5. The end was closer to the 3.5 mark. Okay, so I lined up the ruler, or one end of the pencil, with the 0 mark on the ruler. I saw where it ended. It ended between 3 and 3.5, and the end of the pencil was closer to the 3.5 inch mark. So 3.5 inches. All right, so that's it for measuring and creating measurement data and learning about line plots. So basically, keeping in mind for line plots, all the X's represent one of the objects that are being measured or counted. Okay. All right, so in our next lesson or session, we will be talking about estimating and measuring liquid volume. So until then, may the numbers always be in your favor.